Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 2023 Council Agenda Briefing. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening. So I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Items for council. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held on 28 February 2023. Item 4 is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies, and there's no apologies for this evening. And item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, of which there is nil this evening. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any interest that they wish to declare this evening? I'm not seeing any hands or any lights, so I'm going to take that as a no. Item 8 is presentations, and item 8.3 is deputations. And this evening we have two speakers who will have up to 10 minutes each to address council. I'd like to begin by inviting Mr. Bob Mitchell of South Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.1.3. Welcome, Mr. Mitchell. The microphone is yours.
Thank you very much, Mayor Greg Milner. And thank you, councillors, for allowing such things as deputations, because I believe that they are very important parts of feedback to the council. I've always been respectful to all the councillors and the way that you handle yourself during this time. Thank you. My deputation is covering the fact that these letters that came from the response to Councillor Mary Choi's notice of motion, the various letters that you all have in front of you, basically come to one major conclusion. The City of South Perth, the city, still has not received any funding from the state government for the Recreation and Aquatic Facility RAF project. The project will come back to council at the March 21st September 2023 agenda briefing for stage 1, indoor aquatics and golf, fairly fully developed, and possibly stage 2, indoor playing courts, partly developed, as part of the staged approach. In previous city agenda papers, there's been a lot of information redacted, and most of the key assumptions that are essential for the understanding of the issues and the risk factors especially have been redacted under the term commercial in confidence, which makes it impossible for the public to know how financially responsible is the information provided to council. The letters, attachments 10.1.3 A to F, contain some important phrases, and some are highlighted here. The CEO's letter of 39.22 to Minister Templeman states, with a further 17 million to be secured by a procurement process for the RAF operator. It is hoped soon that some information can be made available publicly about this procurement process. It's behind a lot of the fears that we have about the project as a whole, the fact that we just have not been told anything. The Minister Templeman's response of 23rd of January 23 states, when he was basically saying there is no state money at this stage, I note the city funding request for this project does not fall within the scope of any existing state government city funding request, any state government support and recreation funding programs. Also, he says, I also note that the proposed local government contribution to the project was lower than could be reasonably expected. That seems to be something that I'm sure Council will take on board. The commitment of the city for the RAF is to not be an ongoing financial burden for the city ratepayers seem to rule out any significant increase from the 20 million city funding. With escalation of building costs, even stage one will probably require a total of between $60 to $80 million. You would have much better figures than I would, but that's the calculation that a lot of us have been making. I'm aware that the Wacker development is experiencing such cost increases, and you could read your local paper for that comment. Again, I'm hoping this funding issue will be fully addressed by the 21st to the 3rd, 23 agenda briefing, and the assumptions and risk factors be made publicly available with only minor redactions. The CEO, in the city's response back to Minister Templeman of the 3rd of the 2nd, 23, states, one of the key principles when planning for the RAF is that ongoing subsidy from city rates revenue would not be required. Please keep to that promise. Councillors, please be very careful at your March meetings that this principle is maintained and that the accounting system stands up to close scrutiny. Unless a funding miracle happens, it is almost certain that stage 3, the 50-metre outdoor pool, will never be built, even if the state government contributes $20 million later, because of the sequence of events and the amount of land clearing and work that would need to be done at this stage. Councillors, please be as open as possible with the public on the probable good and bad news of the proposed RAF. At the special electors meeting, I asked why George Burnett Reserve was not to be evaluated in parallel with the golf course site for a staged development of the aquatic aspects, which would be much more logically sited there. I was told by the CEO that the $20 million from the federal government was specifically tied to the RAF being built at the Collier Park Golf Course. And I'm prepared to table the papers that give me that conclusion. They're bits of writing that I've got from emails and conversations, but the main source comes from the Steve Irons' office itself. And so what I'm really saying is that council needs to be told that at the initial stage, this was not true. I'm not disputing that there is now a contract between the city and the federal government that has as its site the Collier Park Golf Course. I'm not disputing that. It's not a credibility issue with Mike Bradford. However, I would like to say that the conclusion that was given by the Steve Irons' office was that the money was not tied to any particular site. It was up to the council, and I'll quote you direct if you want to do that. I've copies of the correspondence from Steve Irons' office stating that the site was not tied to the grant. So while I welcome the fact that these letters were sent, I know a lot of people in the council felt that it was perhaps pushing the state government in the wrong way and perhaps jeopardising an ongoing relationship. But I believe that, Mary, a lot of good has come out of those letters. We've now got a few ideas from the state government, not promising any funds, but at least indicating the type of thinking that will go into their final decision. And I ask you, if you've got any doubt of my credibility in terms of the papers that I'm talking about, I'm prepared to table them and ask that if I do, they'd be attached to the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you for your deputation, Mr. Mitchell. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Mitchell this evening? I might have a couple. Mr Mitchell, you did mention that you had correspondence from Steve Irons saying that the federal funding for the RAF is not tied or should not be tied to any particular site. How old is that correspondence, if you don't mind me asking?
It goes back to 2019.
2019.
Before the decision was made by the council to choose the Collier Park site. So what I'm saying is that at that time, this was correct and true and genuine information. I'll read it to you if you like, sir.
What I might ask is if you're able to forward the correspondence that you're referring to all of the councillors, that would be greatly appreciated.
If I give you this copy tonight, could that be achieved without me forwarding it?
I'm sure that's fine. Governance, are we able to collect what Mr Mitchell has there? Thank you very much.
Okay. The person mostly quoted is Matthew Gobbert, one of Steve Irons' staff. And so he's an actual person that you can verify this with.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions for Mr Mitchell? No. Okay. Thank you very much for your deputation. I'd now like to invite Mr Dave Wilson of Mount Pleasant, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 10.3.1. Welcome, Mr Wilson, and we look forward to your deputation.
Thank you very much. I don't know if this will be a longer deputation. We're here to provide the ability for the planning department and the councillors to ask any questions in regards to our application. We're aware that it's gone through a bit of a process with stats and so on, so forth. So we're here to be available for any questions in regards to our application.
Very good. Is that the entirety of the deputation?
Sorry?
Is that the entirety of the deputation?
Yes, we're here just as a last recourse to make sure that if there's any questions prior to the upcoming meeting, that we resolve any, let's say, misunderstandings in terms of clarifications of height or anything else to avoid any other further complications.
No problem at all. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Wilson this evening? Councillor Russell.
Not a question, but I'd just like to acknowledge that we did have a very short but very amenable SAT mediation where, in my opinion, all the items were addressed. In particular, I think the applicant has exceeded the R codes in terms of deep soil areas, and that what we can now see in the landscape plan, and also exceeded the R codes in terms of livable housing design guidelines, where we'll now have all 7 properties confirmed as being silver. So, yes, that's all I needed to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? That's a no. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that concludes item 8. We now move on to item 10, which is the draft February reports. And I'll now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, to take you through the balance of the draft February reports. Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.1, City of South Perth Community Safety and Crime Prevention Plan 2022 to 2027. The City's Strategic Community Plan 2021 to 2031 includes a range of strategies to supporting a diverse and accessible community. The City had a former Community Safety and Crime Prevention Plan that has recently expired. A new draft Community Safety and Crime Prevention Plan 2022 to 27 has been developed by the City to outline how community safety outcomes will be incorporated within the City's community programs, services, project, events and facilities into the future. The draft Community Safety and Crime Prevention Plan requires public advertising to invite community and stakeholder comment. The revised draft plan will then be re-presented to Council for final endorsement.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions. First of all, where does advocacy sit in this plan, please? For example, actions the city can lead and facilitate or advocate for where control sits outside local government.
Should I send that to Ms Lummer or to Mr Quigley? Mr Quigley.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. Can you give us an example of what you mean?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Quigley. Just in the role that the city plays in advocacy for this plan. So say if, it sits with the state government, looking at crime and safety, we know a lot of that is to do with policing, which sits within the state government. Where does the advocacy, where is that outlined in this plan? Whose role is it and where does it appear?
Mr Quigley.
We'll take that question on notice.
Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Quigley. And I'm just wondering, flowing from that question, whether an advocate role can be assigned as a category on page 7 of the plan. If the city can consider that, please, and take that one on notice. And my last question in relation to this item is, when this plan is on the table and I can't read my own writing, sorry. Oh yeah, when this plan is on the table and there are real concerns out in the community regarding safety and crime, should a council delegate be assigned, like a council delegate position be assigned to the city's community safety and crime prevention group after the next election, if not before, please?
Mr Quigley.
That's a decision for council.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillors, any further questions on this item? Councillor Navard.
Well, my question was relating to whether we could specifically mention theft of bicycles and scooters, including electric models, in the section that was referring to theft from vehicles. So, I mean, obviously it's up to the city to work out how that might happen. So, but if it could be mentioned, and my reason for that was that in the local community socials, there's always a lot of concern from the community about theft of scooters and bikes. So.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Mr Quigley.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The draft plan outlines 4 overarching community safety and crime prevention priority areas, which include home safety, theft of possession from motor vehicles, antisocial behaviour and road safety. These priority areas are based on crime statistics and also community and stakeholder engagement, which included feedback from the WA Police and the city's community safety group. So the plan includes specific actions to implement those 4 identified priority areas. In terms of theft, theft can occur in various settings. So it could occur inside or outside homes, inside or outside motor vehicles, at public places and spaces, etc. The draft plan does make provision for addressing theft in people's homes and motor vehicles, because there's particular categories for that, and also public places, but to a lesser extent. So having the feedback from Councillor Navard, that can be incorporated into the final plan once it's presented to council for adoption, and it can be done in quite an easy way, because there's a category already called addressing antisocial behaviour, so that would fit neatly under that priority area, and it'd be quite a low cost initiative, because the city would be running mainly community awareness campaigns to educate people about minimising the risk of bicycle and scooter theft. There's various campaigns that are run at the moment, which include Lock It or Leave It, Gone in 60 Seconds campaign, Remove It or Lose It. So all of these campaigns are actually running at the moment. So it'd be just about tying those in to educate the community about locking up their bikes and scooters to minimise the risk of theft.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillors, any further questions? I think Councillor Russell was first.
Yes, thank you. With regard to the previous plan, the 2017-2021 plan, is it possible to get a breakdown of the cost expenditure that related to the objectives of those plans and the revenue received from state government in forms of grants or otherwise?
Mr Quigley.
Yes, that can be provided.
Councillor Brenda Brandis, I thought I saw your hand go up there.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, just with regard to community grants, we obviously provide community grants for activation and also for various initiatives to sort of combat crime in areas. A couple of questions around that. Firstly, how much is each of the grants that we offer to communities to actually undertake some initiatives? And how much have we spent? So this will probably be appropriate for Councillor Russell's question as well, with regard to how much have we actually spent in the last, say, financial year on those initiatives, and how successful have they been?
Mr. Quigley.
There's two main current programs relating to community safety initiatives. So the first one is the city's community funding program, whereby applicants can apply for up to a maximum of $5,000 to undertake a range of community programs that have community benefits. So that could be a community safety project, for example. So that's one. And the second one is the home safety rebate scheme, whereby eligible residents can apply for minor grants. So they're like $250 to purchase home safety equipment and install them in their residence. In terms of your second question, I'll have to take that on notice because there's a bit of research around that one.
Thank you, Mr. Quigley. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.2, City of South Perth Access and Inclusion Plan 2022 to 2027. The City's Strategic Community Plan 2021 to 2031 includes a range of strategies relating to supporting a diverse and accessible community. The City had a former Disability Access and Inclusion Plan that has recently expired. A new Access and Inclusion Plan 2022 to 27 has been developed by the City to outline how access and inclusion outcomes will be incorporated within the City's community programs, services, project, events and facilities. The Access and Inclusion Plan has a broader scope than the former Disability Access and Inclusion Plan and includes access and inclusion activities for all, including people with disability, people from diverse backgrounds and people who are disadvantaged. The draft Access and Inclusion Plan was advertised for community and stakeholder comment in November and December 2022. The final Access and Inclusion Plan is now presented to Council for final endorsement.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? I think Councillor Choi was first.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, my question is just the same as the former question in relation to the last item just discussed. So in relation to the role of advocacy, where this sits in the plan, and in relation to where control for an actionable objective sits outside of the local government. I'm happy for that to be taken on notice as well. Thank you.
Mr. Quigley, did you wish to take that one on notice?
Yes, thank you.
No problem. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Navard.
My question relates to the feedback that was obtained in August and September last year relating to the community comments. And as I was going through, I thought there were some really valuable comments in there. And based on that, I was wondering if the city could compile a task list of the comments made and then do some considering about what might be reasonably in, how a prioritising process might be compiled, and then some sort of recommendation and take it back to their steering committee. Obviously not every comment is going to be valuable, but there were some very good ones there, and that's why I'm making that request.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you for the question. All feedback submitted on the draft plan during the engagement period was considered by the City, with the relevant feedback being incorporated into the final Access and Inclusion Plan that's presented. So there's 32 prioritised actions in the final plan, and those 32 actions are based on comprehensive community and stakeholder engagement that's been undertaken by the City, including feedback that was submitted by the Department of Communities and the City's Inclusive Communities Advisory Group. So some suggestions or proposals that were submitted during the engagement period are not incorporated into the final plan because of various reasons. So some of those reasons are there were competing priorities, or they were duplicated the actions that were already included in the plan or due to resourcing constraints. The final plan, once adopted, will be subject to ongoing monitoring and reporting. So the city will provide reports back on a quarterly basis and also on an annual basis in the annual report to ensure the actions can effectively respond to any arising access and inclusion priorities over the 5-year lifespan of the plan. However, there was some general feedback that was received during the engagement period that relates to the city's municipal operations, and that has been referred on to the relevant business unit to follow up.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillors, any further questions for the administration on... Oh, Ms Lamar, anything to add?
Yes, sorry, I just wanted to maybe ask Councillor Choi if she could sort of provide, not right now, but before Mr Quigley has to answer the question on advocacy for both plans, if you could sort of provide an example of what sort of thing you think could be advocated by the city, then that will give us an idea of how to fit that into the plan. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms Lamar. Councillors, Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a couple of questions. The first one's with regard to the purchasing policy P605. So I realise we've obviously got concessions around tendering process for organisations that support workers who have disabilities. Just wondering how many vendors are we actively using that do provide those sort of services to the city and actually employ people with disabilities? And is there any indication of what sort of value that is that we're actually spending?
I'll send that your way, Mr Quigley. And also, is that part of the plan itself, or is that a question that's sort of tangential to the plan?
That's part of the plan, Mr Mayor.
Mr Quigley.
So I'll have to take the first part of your question on notice because I'll need to liaise with our financial services department just to check on that info. In terms of number of employees in the city that have a disability, that's very challenging for an organisation to collect that information because it's not a mandatory requirement for employees to nominate. So it's done voluntarily. So the city has some understanding of the number of staff that we have that do have a disability, but as I said, because it's not compulsory, it'd be difficult to actually produce that information.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Mr Quigley. Part of your response is actually what my second question is actually about. It's referring to also the city's advocacy with regard to inclusion of people with disabilities and employment. So you did answer part of that, but I was just probably thinking, was the city considering working with an agency that could provide some of those people with opportunities who could actually provide support to the city? Yeah. Is that something that we'd be considering?
Mr Quigley?
The city's actually worked with agencies in recent years to provide both work placement opportunities and also casual employment for staff. So it's something that we've done in the past.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillors, any further questions for the administration on this item this evening? No. Okay. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.3, response to Councillor Mary Choi notice of motion. This report provides an update to Council in response to Council Resolution number 0922/154, item 12.1, notice of motion, Councillor Mary Choi, RAF, from its meeting held on the 27th of September 2022.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? I might ask a couple. So we have had a deputation from Mr Mitchell this evening. What does the federal government, I'm not sure if this is to Mr Bradford or Ms Amprimo, but Mr Bradford, what does the federal government funding agreement actually say on the subject of the location for the recreation and aquatic facility? Is the $20 million in funding tied to Collier Park Golf Course?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm not sure of the correspondence that Mr Mitchell was referring to, but hopefully I'll get to see that shortly. But it sounds like it was in discussions with the former member for the federal seat of Swan in the lead up to various discussions, which I clearly wasn't privy to. The federal funding agreement, which is the contract between the Commonwealth and the city that was entered into by the Department of Health and represents the project funding agreement that the Commonwealth has committed to, has two relevant clauses. And I've actually provided a copy of these to councillors in terms of on the table. I'll read them out. So clause B6 talks about the activity details, and it says that the activity consists of carrying out the works on the property. So that's, and then it goes into what the broad scope is. And then there is a definition of what the property is. Clause B8 says the property is part of the parcel of land known as Collier Park Golf at Hayman Road, Como, Western Australia, being a part of the land comprising lot 500 of deposited plan 4161118 and part of the land comprising lot 3858 on deposited plan 218457. So that's pretty clear to me that the federal funding agreement is tied to the site. The logic, as I was involved after some of those other discussions occurred, but when the agreement was put in place, it's pretty clear to me that the Commonwealth is seeking to define a project in terms of what is going to be built, when it's going to be built, and where it's going to be built, to give them some certainty that we've got a project that stands up to, has some rigour around it. And so in doing that, they clearly wanted to tie down and make certain around the site. Now, by that point, when that agreement was established, council had in fact decided on the site as well in terms of its site selection process. So the current agreement does in fact specify the site.
And just as a follow-up question, has the city received anything from the federal government that would undermine those clauses and that agreement that you've referred to?
I might get Mr. Border to add to this if I don't cover all of it. So, with effect a period last year, we are in breach of the federal funding agreement, and we have been in discussions with the Commonwealth around re-establishing adjusted milestones and also removing from the scope the outdoor 50-metre pool from the scope of the federal funding agreement. And those discussions have been ongoing, and we have yet to receive a formal response in terms of the acceptance of changes to milestones or the removal of scope. Is there anything to add?
All right. And my final question is, what impact will the recreation and aquatic facility have on Collier Park Golf Course, both in terms of stage 1 and assuming that all 3 stages of the RAF will be built? Ms Amprimo, should I send that your way?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The current proposal is not to impact on any of the 27 holes of golf.
Thank you very much. Councillors, does anyone else have any questions for the administration this evening? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just with regard to responses from the member for South Perth, Mr. Baker, and also the federal member, Ms. Senator Mascarenhas, can the city advise if they've had any further communication or any further correspondence or feedback from either of the members? Thank you.
Should I send that to Ms Amprimo or to Mr Bohr? Or Mr Bradford?
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. You mean the letters are the letters?
Yes, my question was, has there been any further correspondence or communication with either the state or the federal member? I realise we haven't received anything from them formally, otherwise it would probably be included in tonight's agenda item, but have we had any further correspondence or conversations with either the federal or the state member?
The city hasn't had any. I think we've had some conversations with the federal member's office staff. I'm not sure of the details of that, but in terms of discussions with the local member, I meet regularly with Mr Baker and we discuss a range of things. He remains an advocate for us achieving the funding in support of the RAF. But that's it, that's the nature of those discussions and how we might go about it. That's it.
Mr. Ball.
Receipt of the letters, and they have asked us to keep the office updated of council decision making. That is the extent of our discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Ball.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this item this evening? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.2.1, lease of property, former Manning Library, 144 Manning Road, Carrawarra. This report provides an update on the public submissions received for a lease to Be Our Guest Holdings Proprietary Limited for a portion of the building known as Old Manning Library, located within Reserve 33639, 144 Manning Road, Carrawarra.
Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.2.2, lease of property, Boatshed Cafe. This report provides an update on the public submissions received for a lease to Miller Holdings Proprietary Limited, trading as the Boatshed Cafe, for approximately 1,574 square metres of land on lot 1203 on deposited plan 28824, and approximately 310 square metres of land on lot 11835 on deposited plan 240379 to be excised from Crown Reserve number 34565.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item? No questions. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.3.1, proposed 7 times 4 and 5 storey grouped dwellings, lot 229 or number 112 Lockhart Street and 11 McDougall Street, Como, section 31, reconsideration. The city received an application for development approval for 7 group dwellings consisting of 4 4-storey and 3 5-storey dwellings at lot 229, 112 and Lockhart and 11 McDougall Street, Como in May 2022. The application was refused by council at its meeting held on the 25th of October, and the applicant subsequently sought a review of that decision by the State Administrative Tribunal. The original proposal has been modified following mediation sessions, and as such, SAT has issued an order on the 30th of January inviting council to reconsider the matter under section 31 of the State Administrative Tribunal Act. The modified proposal is considered acceptable in light of additional modifications to the roof terraces to 3 of the dwellings, which results in these structures now not meeting the definition of a storey in the R codes. Further information has been provided in relation to universal access and an agreement to provide minor modifications to the previously submitted landscape architect concept design report submitted as part of the original development application. Accordingly, the application is recommended for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.3.2, transition from Rivers Regional Council to Rivers Regional Subsidiary. This report discusses enabling the execution of the charter for the Rivers Regional Subsidiary and facilitate the wind-up of the Rivers Regional Council.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments December 2022. The report to council presents to council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 and 31 December 2022 for information.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering, there appears to be thousands of dollars spent on legal fees again last month, and I'm just wondering, as I asked at the last, I think November briefing that I was here, if we're able to get sort of any sort of breakdown on which departments this is coming from. Is it from planning? Is it from like where?
Mr. Adams, should I send that one your way?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We can provide some further breakdown to councillors about that.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Adams, for that. That'd be really useful. I'm just also wondering, there is an item, I'm just trying to find it again now, with relation to safe, active streets. I'm just wondering what that payment is in relation to, like which street or streets.
Mr Adams?
Do you have a payment number for me?
Councillor Choi?
Sorry, I lost it. I will email you if that's okay, Mr Adams.
Yep, that'll be fine.
All right. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, December 2022. The monthly financial statements are provided within attachments A through I with a high level analysis and comments in the report.
Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.3, listing of payments for January 2023. This report presents to Council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 and 31 January for information.
Any questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.4, monthly financial statements, January 2023. The monthly financial statements are provided in the attachments A through I with high-level analysis contained in the comments of the report.
Thank you. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.5 is Tender 7 of 2022, provision of cleaning services. This report considers submissions received from the advertising of Tender 7 of 2022 for the provision of cleaning services. The report outlines the assessment process and the evaluation of tenders received and recommends approval of the tender that provides the best value for money and level of service to the city. I also note that there's a confidential attachment with this item.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Russell.
Thank you. I understand that we recently awarded a contract for the cleaning of the barbecues not so long ago. Is that contract not valid anymore, or is it?
Ms Amprimo, that may have been before your time, but...
It was before.
Through you, Mr Mayor. I believe the contract you're referring to was an interim arrangement until we went back to the market with this current procurement. And that was late last year or mid to late last year that we entered into that contract as an interim provision from when the previous contract ended.
No, it's earlier than that. Okay.
Well, we might take it on notice then.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.6, budget review for the period ended 31 January 2023. A comprehensive review of the 2022-23 adopted budget based on actual results for the period to 31 January has been completed, with comments on the identified variances. The ongoing impact of COVID-19, along with the war in Ukraine, continues to cause uncertainty and supply shortages around the world, with a significant impact on world economic activities. This has resulted in steep rises in inflation worldwide, including Australia. As is the case in prior years, officers looked for opportunities to reduce and manage operating expenditure. This effort, together with increased revenue, has resulted in an improvement to the overall financial position of the city, as reflected in the revised budget. A statement of financial activity is included, the same as the report included in each month's council meeting agenda. It compares the adopted budget, original adopted budget, to the reviewed budget, illustrating the movements within the review. A summary of the forecast financial ratios is also attached, as well as schedules of detailed adjustments. The underlying theme of the review was to deliver an improved budget outcome.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I did send Director Adams, an email prior to the meeting. I'm not sure if he's had a chance to look at it yet, with some questions. If he hasn't, I'm quite happy to just ask the questions and then let them be taken on notice.
Sorry.
Mr Adams?
Yes, I did have a quick look at it. I do have, we do have the ability to respond to some of them now, if not all of them.
Councillor Choi, did you wish to ask your first question?
Yes, that's great. Thanks, Mr Mayor and Mr Adams. So in reference to attachment C, capital expenditure amendments, can you please advise why any of the new items listed other than those that were previously included in the current draft budget and subsequently removed by council resolution to reduce the rate increase, amounting to around $135,000, was not foreseen for the current budget at the time the current budget was adopted by council.
Mr Adams.
Yeah, so as outlined in the report, there are a number of reasons for some of these inclusions. Some of them are due to grants being received, so there's a number that relate to road projects that are grant funded, particularly the biggest one, the low cost urban road safety. And there was also part grant funding for, I think, lighting replacement in there. So that's outlined in the report. Some are also due to the fact that they were, when they were excluded from the budget adoption, I seem to remember that the mover of that motion did say that if we got to the budget review stage and we had the ability to fund some of those projects and they were still priorities, that they could be brought back at that time and reconsidered by council. So some of them were in that category. And I guess there's also some others that weren't foreseen at that time, particularly things such as CCTV at the animal care facility. That's a work health and safety issue, as is the CCTV at the front reception area. So there's a number of reasons why some of those have been put back in there. There are explanations against them in the schedule there, but if you want some more detail on particular items, then I'm happy to provide that to you prior to the OCM.
Your second question, Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you again, Director Adams. So my second question is, why do any of these new items, including those that were removed by council resolution when the current budget was adopted, need to be included now and not wait to be included as part of the next annual budget process, please?
Mr Adams.
Yeah, so I think I've partially answered that already with regard to things such as work health and safety issues. Things like the CCTV trailer, for instance, that's been put back in there, is part of the plan that you were just talking about. And so I guess, if you adopt that plan, then it follows that we probably need to make the expenditure on the CCTV trailer. There's a reason for everything in there, and I think we can go through and explain them in a bit more detail if that's required.
The third question, Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and again, Director Adams. My last question is, why should any brand new items take precedence in the budget review over those items removed by council resolution when the current budget was adopted, i.e. Heritage House, lighting upgrade and minor works improvements, 40,000, and Como Beach multi-swing park playground, 40,000, etc.?
Mr Adams.
Yeah, so partly to do with our capacity to deliver some of those things. So the things that we've put back into the budget at budget review time are things that are achievable between now and the end of the financial year. Things such as playgrounds require us to actually design it, perhaps some consultation around what actually goes in there, and then ordering the equipment and installing it. So there's a number of items that we would have liked to have reconsidered, but if we put them back in, they'd end up being carryovers, so we excluded those. So they'll probably be reconsidered in the new budget discussions for the next financial year.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any further questions on this item for this evening? Councillor Cridland.
Amongst the momentous decisions in this item for us next week is whether or not the council's willing to remove the $5 fee for replacement animal tags, which is clearly a big issue. I know I paid it myself. I was just wondering, how many complaints had we received for people paying $5 to get their replacement animal registration tag.
Mr Adams, I'd forgive you if you didn't have that information to hand, but let's have a go.
I know of at least two. However, it's not really about the complaints. That's one part of it. But upon receiving those complaints, we reconsidered our own costs in actually charging that $5 fee. So to charge someone $5 probably costs us in excess of $30 or $40 in staff time. So it didn't make a lot of sense. So that's the primary reason for taking it out. It was the complaints that alerted us to the fact that we were still doing it.
Thank you. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.7, Council Caretaker Policy. On the 22nd of November 22, Council resolved that a draft Council Caretaker Policy be prepared. This report addresses the resolution.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, does anyone have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? I've got a few, so I'll ask Council to bear with me. So, Clause 3, Paragraph 3 of the draft policy, that's not Clause 3, Sub-Clause 3, it's Clause 3, Paragraph 3, states that council members nominating for re-election may access information and assistance regarding the city's operations and council matters during a caretaker period, but only to the extent necessary to perform their role as a councillor and limited to matters currently relevant to the city. Then in square brackets it says refer to section 592 of the Local Government Act 1995, close square brackets. So, hypothetical situation. If a council member nominated for re-election and that council member was to use publicly available information about the city for an electoral purpose, would that be a breach of Clause 3? I guess that's to Mr Adams.
Not in my view, Mr Mayor. I understand that there may be some different interpretations that could be applied, but it was intended to be only in relation to information that was available because of the person's existing status as a council member.
Thank you for that, and that's a fair answer. I suppose my follow-up question is, does the policy anywhere draw a distinction between city information that is publicly available and city information that is not publicly available?
Not at this point in time, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Clause 4.1 states that during a caretaker period, all council members will scrupulously avoid using or accessing city information, resources or employee resources and expertise for the purpose of gaining an electoral advantage or disadvantage relevant to their own candidacy or any other person's candidacy. Similar sort of question, if a council member was going for re-election, were to access and use publicly available city information, say an annual report, as part of that council member's re-election campaign, would that be a breach of Clause 4.1?
Not in my view, Mr Mayor. Again, it's intended to apply to accessing information that's available due to the position of the person that's been a council member.
All right, and my final question relates to Clause 4.7 of the draft policy, which says a council member who uses city resources for the purpose of persuading electors to vote in a particular way is in breach of Clause 17, Schedule 2 of the Local Government Model Code of Conduct Regulations. And then if you look a little bit further on, there's a paragraph saying, for clarity, local government resources includes but is not limited to employee time or expertise, city-provided equipment, information and communication technologies, and then it carries on with other things. Similar question, a councillor is going for re-election, they want to use information that's publicly available about the city during their election campaign. Could they be found to be in breach of Clause 4.7 if they were to do that?
I guess it would depend on how much common sense was being applied at the time, but I wouldn't have thought that the intent of that clause would be used in that particular way. But as you have pointed out, there may be some need to further clarify what the intent of these particular clauses are. And perhaps we can do that by having another look at the definitions before it goes to council for actual adoption.
Thank you very much. Councillors, does anyone else have any questions? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just following up from your questions to Director Adams. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't the intent of those clauses that the Mayor has pointed out is to ensure that there is a level playing field, that whether you're sitting on council or not, that there is a level playing field in terms of the information that you're using in an election?
Mr Adams.
I believe that's the case.
Thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.8, local government elections. This report is to declare that the Electoral Commission will conduct the local government ordinary election for 5 vacancies to be held in October 2023 and for the election to be conducted by a postal method.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford. Oh, there is no next item. My bad. All right, that brings us to item 12, motions of which previous notice has been given. The first is item 12.1, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Stephen Russell, entitled Amendment to Policy P665, Use of Council Facilities. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? No. In that case, we'll move on to item 12.2, which is notice of motion from Councillor Mary Choi, entitled Donation to the Lord Mayor's Distress Relief Fund Appeal for the Kimberley Floods. Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can you just bear with me a minute? I'm just having issues with my laptop, and I did send some questions on notice to Mr Quigley, and I believe he has those.
While we're waiting for Councillor Choi, Mr Quigley, have you received those questions? Okay. Fire when ready then, Councillor Choi.
Sorry, Mr Quigley, it's through the chair. Do you have a copy of those questions so I could read out to save time? Because I don't know what's happened to my document. Thank you. Okay, if I can proceed, Mr Mayor, thank you.
Please do.
Question 1 is, as the chair of the recent Local Emergency Management Committee meeting, are you able to offer any commentary on the fallout and ongoing impact from the floods on the Kimberley community, please?
Mr Quigley.
Thank you for the question. The city's received the following update today from the Department of Communities about the impact and recovery efforts associated with the recent Kimberley floods. Due to the natural disaster, 300 people in the community were displaced from the Fitzroy Crossing and surrounding area and relocated into Derby and Broome. And 3/4 of that total, so 225 of those people, have now been repatriated to surrounding communities. The Department of Communities has been involved with providing rapid damage assistance, food, accommodation and essential items to the families. The department has commandeered most of the hotel accommodation in Derby and Broome to provide emergency housing for people. And it's estimated that it might take up to 2 years before all of the housing and community infrastructure is restored for the community.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillor Choi, your second question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Mr Quigley. My second question is, are you able to provide any further detail on how donations to the Lord Mayor's Distress Relief Fund assist those people most impacted from a natural disaster, such as the Kimberley floods?
Mr Quigley.
Thank you for the question. Donations to the Lord Mayor's Distress Relief Fund is as follows. So to date, approximately $7.4 million has been donated to the Lord Mayor's Distress Relief Fund to assist with recovery efforts for the Kimberley floods. The Lord Mayor's Distress Relief Fund has a finance subcommittee who oversee the distribution of funds to people most in need. The funds are distributed once the community recovery priorities are determined by the Department of Communities in consultation with the affected local government authorities. So the funds must be used for eligible purchases only, so essential items such as food or furniture, beds, fridges, stoves and household items.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Did you have another question, Councillor Choi?
Yes, one last question. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and again, Mr Quigley. So my last question is, I understand that a National Disaster Risk Reduction Grant Program has recently been established, which aims to proactively reduce the risk and limit the impact of disasters associated with natural hazards on Western Australian communities and economies. Does the City contemplate requiring at any point this type of funding and hence applying for available funding, and the same for the All West Australians Reducing Emergencies Aware Grant Program, please?
Mr Quigley.
Thank you for the question. The City is always looking to maximise external revenue from relevant grant programs to support the municipal funds provided by our ratepayers. The City is aware of those funding programs that you mentioned, and in fact we've applied for the Aware Grant Program before for some emergency management projects. However, the funding is not available to assist with costs associated with the South Perth foreshore due to any erosion.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillors, does anyone have any further questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm assuming that ultimately this comes from the training budget for the councillors. I take it we do have $10,000 to spare within that budget?
Mr Adams, should I send that your way?
Yes, the money's available.
And if we were to grandfather the training allowance for a new councillor that comes in March, is there still sufficient funds for the 10,000?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Yep. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just with regard to available budget, given that we had a good surplus last year and that's sort of been fed back into our retained earnings, how much was that number, and we could utilise some of that retained surplus?
Mr Adams, did we actually have a surplus?
I think I'll get
under expenditure.
Yeah, I think I'll get Mr Lecoq to answer that.
Mr Lecoq.
Through the chair, I got the first part of the question. Can I ask that the second part be repeated?
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Yeah, thank you. It's just with regard to last year's under expenditure. So we came in under budget. We obviously had a net saving with regard to last year's budget. So could that not be utilised as part of this as well through our retained saving there?
Mr Lecoq.
Through the chair, so the budget came in an operating deficit still. So operating wise, we still have operating deficits. These funds typically relate to operations, revenue and expenditure. What you are referring to is the net current asset position where we came in a positive position. So that typically refers to funding, source of funding, i.e. Funds available in reserve funds, the net effect of spending on capital and budgets, spending on capital and loan funds, etc. So
in an attempt to give a simple answer, yes, the money is available in the bank. However, the allocation needs to come out of the operating budget.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Councillors, any further questions? I might ask just one, just to make sure I've understood everything correctly. I thought I read at page 56 of the agenda at item 10.4.6 that even with what appears to be a pretty good improvement in the budget position, we're still forecast to make a deficit of $73,000 for the financial year ending at 30 June 2023. Is that correct, Mr Lecoq?
Yes, Mr Mayor, in terms of the net operating position, that is still correct, yes.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Don't know if you've got it on hand or need to take it on notice, but just the underspend against the deficit last year, because I know we actually established a deficit for last year, but we've come in under that deficit, so that represents a better outturn. Do you have that variance? I thought it was quite a significant number.
Mr Lecoq.
Through the chair, in terms of the annual financial reports, and shooting from the hip and talking from memory, we still came in a net operating deficit. It was, however, yes, lower than initially budgeted, but it's still a loss. So it's still an operating loss.
Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you very much, Mr Lecoq, and happy for this to be taken on notice, but if you've got that under deficit, so that resulted in a better outturn, if you've got that, that'd be handy. Thank you.
Mr Lecoq, did you want to take that one on notice?
I would have to take on notice what the net movement was in terms of the initial operating budget. However, the net deficit was in the vicinity of just around $800,000 as an actual outcome. But what the actual movement is, that I'll have to take on notice.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Okay. That brings item 12 to a close. Item 15 is ordinarily where we would close the meeting to the public if there were any confidential items to discuss, but we don't have any confidential items, so we don't need to do that. And item 16 is closure. So before I close the meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation this evening. I declare the meeting closed at 7 minutes past 7 p.m. Thank you all and good night.